So last weekend I watched The End of Oak Street in the theater. I went to an evening show which had good turnout with friend of the channel Garrett. I guess I'll start the review off by not burying the lead and just give you my rating straight up. Consider it maybe like a soft 7 out of 10, maybe a 6. It's really hard to evaluate. I'd probably rate it higher than any of the Jurassic World films, but definitely behind like the first two Jurassic Parks. Garrett, on the other hand, enjoyed it a lot more than me. He's just easier to please. A lot of my points I'm going to make about the film will draw a direct comparison to the seven Jurassic Park slash World films. It's just kind of the obvious comparison to make. I'll discuss some non-spoiler reasons for my rating if I get into more specific spoilers later, which will be most of the back half of the video. Actually, most of the video period, I think. So yeah, I'll give proper warning for that. I think the weakest part of the film is the family plot. I mean, this is like a recurring thing with dinosaur movies, right? The human element is just weak overall generally. This is part of why Jurassic Park, the very first one, stands out so much, is that it has a really good human element, interesting characters, a lot of good dialogue, which is what elevates that film above the rest of the field of dinosaur sci-fi. This film has extremely generic family drama, like almost so painfully generic that it feels intentional. It feels like they intentionally pick the most like trope filled, contrived 80s like family drama to like put in the movie. It's very strange to me how just generic it is. And definitely the dinosaur stuff is the strong point of the film. This is not shocking and kind of the thing it has to do at a minimum, right? Um, the dinosaur scenes in this film skew more visceral and creepy than more of what you get in Jurassic Park, and the Jurassic films in general. There's some like much more brutal kills too, even though it's still PG-13. It's still like the same rating as the Jurassic films, but it does go much more brutal in its depiction of the kills, which I thought was interesting. Um, Sets it apart a little bit in that way. The animal depictions overall are kind of a mixed bag though, both in terms of like the designs and the behavior. Like the best behavioral elements of this film I like really like and are leagues beyond anything we've had since like the early Jurassic Park films. But the weaker points like would just fit right in with a Jurassic movie, like a modern Jurassic World film. Very generic, not realistic, like stuff like that. The creature designs overall range between like all right and kind of poor. Again, very similar to like modern Jurassic films, or like maybe you get a few animals that actually have a really banger design, and a lot that are like, why did they do this? This is not accurate. This kind of sucks. I don't know why designing dinosaurs is so hard for these movies to do. It's a thing that like baffles me. Um, I think the animals overall in the End of Oak Street have like a really like ragged, filthy, like gremlin-y vibe. They feel like scraggly monsters a lot of the time, which I don't really like. I mean, you look at a bird, even like a large bird of prey, they have a certain like cleaner vibe about them than like the way the animals are depicted in this. It gives the sense of like these animals aren't taking care of themselves. They're just kind of berserkers, which is bad. I don't like that angle. Um, Now, most dinosaurs in this film are actually feathered, but like I said, they don't really have the vibe of a bird. They feel more like a mangy dog in like the way the feathering looks, right? There's no like display feathers. It's just kind of a like a filthy, shaggy coat of feathers. Um, like I appreciate the fact that feathers are in this. Like fantastic. I just this is not the way I would have done the feathers. Um, and overall, like the animal color palettes and stuff are all similarly bland. Like a lot of like basic bland like grays and browns. There's not anything that like really stands out as being too different, which feels like a missed opportunity. There's like some color highlights on the Allosaurus that are really subtle. There's some other stuff going on with color, but it's pretty underwhelming again in the way a lot of like especially Jurassic World, like the 2015 movie, the way a lot of the animals are just kind of gray in that. This is again kind of feeling like that, like a lot of gray. Don't love it. Um, yeah, we have the problem here too of like too much feathering, which is shocking. Never thought that would have happened in a dinosaur movie. We've got like these large animals that probably shouldn't be feathered but are. Like the sauropods in the film are all like fully feathered, which is like nuts. I give it credit for that because at least it's different, but like it strains credibility. Like I appreciate this movie trying to establish its own style with its dinosaurs of this like mangy feathering, but I just don't love that concept, right? I like that they had their own identity. I don't really like the identity they chose, right? And even then, the identity is kind of literally skin deep. Like the shape of the animals, like some of the other details of the animals, like the teeth, are still very Jurassic World, which isn't great. Like the skulls are too wide consistently. They've got the same gnarly like teeth that like the Indominus and the Giga have in the Jurassic World movies. I could do without that. Um, the standout animals in terms of their depictions are probably like the Coelophysis. I think the Coelophysis represent that like gremlinly mangy vibe the best. They feel like an animal, especially with the way they're depicted. That like I could see just being a little shit. The aloe's not bad either. I especially appreciate like the scarring they put on it. It like looks like a individual, unique animal that has been through some shit, and I like that. Even though it, again, looks like the Jurassic World Allosaurus just with a coat of feather, like it's been tarred and feathered, like a coat of just shaggy, mangy feathers just splattered over it. Um, yeah. The last thing I'll say before we get into spoilers, and I'm going to be very vague about this, the ending of the film is kind of weird, and that's all I'll say about it without getting into spoilers. But the ending is like, huh? All right. Here, this is gonna be your countdown for the spoiler section. All right, 5, 4, 3, switch off. Spoilers are coming now. So I'm gonna kind of arrange these spoilers like chronologically, just as they like came to me when I was writing down some notes here. First off, we're gonna start with a character problem in my mind. The son of the main family is very strange. I don't like this character. It does they do some weird things with him, and it feels incredibly weird and inconsistent. He's like portrayed alternatively as like a problem child, and then like a quiet, repressed, awkward nerd, and it just kind of flip flops a little bit, and it just doesn't feel like it's one singular coherent character. It feels like scenes are written for two different boys and then just combined together, and they're like, it's fine. They're teenagers. They're weird. It just doesn't work for me. Like he's like overly attached to his dog. He's a bit awkward, but also he like smokes cigarettes and like shoved a stick in a boy's bike tire and like broke his arm. It's like these don't feel like the same character. These feel like two different like 80s trope male teenagers just combined for some reason. And maybe that was like the intent. Like we're going to take some of these bad boy character traits and some of these nerd character traits and just make it one character. But like why? It doesn't gel. It feels weird. It's not like consequential to really much of anything either. So like except for the dog thing. So like why? Another thing I should say, dog doesn't die. So if that's a sticking point for you, it is for some people. Like killing a dog, then we'll watch the film. The dog survives. Okay, it's fine. The dog's fine. um, but yeah, another big problem with the human element is this bothered me immensely because the film starts with this like neighborhood picnic, which is kind of setting up this whole dynamic of like this neighborhood that comes together and like works with each other and hangs out, and a proper social circle in this neighborhood, not just isolated families. And then that never comes into play again. Like the film is essentially setting up a scenario where the neighborhood should be like banding together to survive the Mesozoic, and it just doesn't do it. It's very weird because like the opening scene with this picnic is very much setting something like that up, and it just I don't know why it doesn't happen. Again, it feels almost like a deliberate subversion of expectations of like we're gonna have the community gathering, so this film is about community, and then it's just not gonna be about community. Like really? Like what's the point of that? It's just weird. And so after that, we get the neighborhood like sent to the past. We get like an admittedly fun sequence of like the various neighbors getting massacred, which is where the community stuff theoretically would have been them coming together to protect each other. Instead, it's just them getting killed off and like every man for himself. And this is where we start to get into like the inconsistently good or bad dinosaur behavior. this sequence essentially consists of like gangs of feral seal vices just running roughshod over the whole neighborhood, just massacring everybody. That like it's kind of like this sort of like over the top massacre type scene that comes out of like a zombie film or like a Jurassic World film, like when in Dominion when like the Carnotaurus and Allosaurus escape from the dinosaur market, they just start chomping people in the streets, and it's kind of weird. It's like the animals never had any food before that moment. They've been starving for a week, and they're just like gone mad with hunger. I don't know. Conversely, though, when we get to what I think is the standout sequence of the film, which is the Allosaurus segment, the Allosaurus attack is so good. It's fantastically realistic behavior. It starts with the Allo kind of like in the background behind some things getting teased. And then you see it straight up stalking the family. Like it's in the distance and you see it quietly creeping up to them because their backs are turned and they're talking amongst themselves and nobody's seen it. So he's doing like the cat thing of like stalking the prey. And then it's only when somebody notices the Allo and turns around and like screams that the Allo actually makes a vocalization and then starts running. Beautiful. Big spoiler here. Big spoiler. The Allosaurus ends up killing Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan Kenobi does not have the high ground. The Allosaurus has the high ground. Obi-Wan dies. And this is like an exceptionally brutal and fantastic kill. Like excellent stuff. And even better, when the Allosaurus claims the kill, he's done attacking. He's picked off a member of the herd. He's got his dinner. He's done. He's just chowing down. He's just having a good time. I love it. I love the fact that like it doesn't feel the need to massacre every single person. Just the whole sequence is overall a fantastic depiction of like a predator hunting. Loved it. Having mentioned now both Coelophysis and Allosaurus, it should be obvious the film is heavily anachronistic. Although there's like a few caveats to this. The film roster does appear to be predominantly Morrison formation Jurassic period, with like Camarasaurus and Stegosaurus having prominent roles, appearing multiple times. Furthermore, like the Coelophysis are never called Coelophysis in the movie. I actually couldn't figure out if they are intended to be Coelophysis. I don't know if this is like a film community dinosaur fan thing where like everybody's latched onto the idea they're Coelophysis, or if they actually are. I just couldn't find any official information identifying them that way. So you could just take these to be some sort of generic like Morrison formations early Coelurosaur, Coelurus or Nitholestes or something with like a weird depiction. Or even an unknown animal that we've never seen before, right? Because like in the fossil record, any animal that's fossilized is going to be like a fraction of a percent of the actual diversity of animals in that area or the world in general. So like there would be theoretically plenty of animals, especially smaller carnivores, in the Morrison formation we've never seen. So it could just be one of those. So you can kind of headcanon away some of the inconsistencies. A lot of other animals that are like definitely intended to be anachronistic species as well, like some of the like the turtles and like the titanoboa and some other creatures that are in this movie. You could just imagine these are generic giant prehistoric snake, generic turtle, or like ancestors of these more later species. And for other specific anachronistic species like the inclusion of a singular Spinosaurus, well, it's one Spinosaurus, so you could just imagine he got time portaled there. Now the problem with that though is at the end of the film like establishes while there are multiple portals, they all lead to the same like temporal and spatial area, right? They're not like locked into like one specific spot, but they fall within a very brief window of time, like minutes to hours to days. And they fall geographically in a very specific area, like this neighborhood and the outskirts around the neighborhood that disappears. And so this is like a very deliberate link between a specific segment of the modern day and a specific segment of like the past. So there's no evidence of like a Cretaceous time portal existing to transport a Spinosaurus to the Morrison formation. This is like, it's very much just a case of they wanted to put a Spino in. But you could come up with an excuse within the context of the film. I'm not gonna give them that though. It really feels like they kind of started with a paleo accurate like Morrison roster and then decided to throw it out halfway through development and just throw in some other animals they like for fun, which I think is unfortunate. I think there's a lot of value to be had in like a paleo accurate dinosaur horror film, because I think you could have some very like terrifying and strange behavior from dinosaurs without stretching um believability. Because if you ever seen a bird like attack something, or like a large predatory bird like eat a mouse or a rabbit, it's like fucking horrific. And in the same vein, like picking something like the Morrison Formation or Hell Creek gives you such a wide diversity of interesting dinosaurs. Why do you need to succumb to the desire to put other animals from out of time into that sequence? Like, come on. You don't. Why? Almost every animal that's anachronistic could have like an equivalent animal from the actual timeline that would work. This is a problem with the Dominion prologue as well. Like, why are you doing this? It feels dumb and lazy, and like it doesn't have to be. Um. So yeah, the standout Allosaurus sequence does unfortunately start with like a pretty contrived human sequence. The film needs to get the characters out of the house where they've like holed up, so that they can end up in peril, right? And so this starts by the son like seeing his dog that's been missing for the whole movie since the time jump happened, uh, run by or whatever, being chased by a dinosaur. So he wants to rescue his dog. So he like just leaves the house. Like, okay, fine. It's dumb, but like it's within the believability of that character who's like overly attached to his dog. I'm okay with that. The problem that like I have is this boy runs across the yard or whatever, and disappears. And his sister sees him like run across the yard and disappear. And so she decides to just chase after him and leave the house. Not like join him in the search for the dog, but follow him out into the fucking Mesozoic to try and track him down. Without telling her parents, who are downstairs and have weapons, she just runs out with nothing. That's crazy. That's ridiculous. You can't excuse that by being like a dumb teenager in a stressful situation. That's beyond the pale. That is not reasonable human behavior. That is 100% contrived. Then the parents find out the kids are gone, and they've got to run out and track down the kids. So you got 3 parties of 4 people split up and running across the neighborhood. Very contrived. It's not great. And so this leads into the whole Allosaurus sequence, and like, the basically jump starts the end game of the film. There's other like unforgivable human, or not unforgivable, sorry. There's other underwhelming human plot lines. There's like a tossed in bully plot, which is of like, essentially, it's just weird. It breaks the characterization of the son, I feel like, and it serves no purpose. It's thrown in for like a minute early on, and then comes back when the kid's on his own in the sequence I'm talking about with that leads up to the Allosaurus, where the bully finds him. And it's like, none of this matters. This doesn't change the characterization of the character. This doesn't add anything interesting to the plot. It's just a weird little moment between some teenagers. Like, okay. And then they introduce also at the beginning of the film, like the new kid to the neighborhood. And again, introduced in like a minute, forgotten about for like an hour, shows up at the end of the movie. Weirdly tacked on. Again, it feels a little bit like these are some like very basic tropes of like an 80s Amblin style children adventure movie that need to be thrown in here because it's part of the required recipe. A little odd. The ending in general ends up feeling pretty rushed, I think. I think the pacing is pretty good overall up until that point. Like, it's a brisk film, but it doesn't feel like it's too brisk, like it's rushing past things until you get to like the ending segments. Everything like after the Allosaurus is like, we gotta go, we gotta wrap this up, we gotta end this, we're out of money. Yeah, so the Allosaurus attack has happened. They got the new kid reintroduced. And basically, they just quickly see a portal in the distance and like rush towards it and escape after some interference from pterosaurs. It's not that simple. There's more that goes on, but that's essentially largely what happens. Like, the movie's done. Now we just got to get the kids out of here, to get the family out of here. What's left of it. They end up returning to the present like 20 minutes before the neighborhood disappears. And then Anne Hathaway's character makes some phone calls to rescue the neighbors and like orders a pizza from the pizza chain her husband delivers for. And so he shows up at like this bus stop and like delivers a pizza. So they manage to save the dad from getting sent to the past where he dies. This is all framed as a happy ending with like the family reunited. However, it doesn't work that way. The ending of the film explicitly shows that the new girl that they had rescued with them was able to rescue her family in the past. So her whole family, including herself, managed to escape the neighborhood before being sucked into the past, and she is also there with her family. So she's duplicated, right? Her past self and her self that went to the Mesozoic are both living side by side with her family, which means that Anne Hathaway abducted her husband from the past version of herself and her kids and condemned herself and her children to be sent to the Mesozoic without the husband, almost assuredly to die. Which is interesting. It's kind of nuts, but also it's kind of interesting. It's like the setup for a more interesting film. Like, imagine a film where it's like Anne Hathaway gets sent to the Mesozoic and like figures out somehow that like her husband was stolen by herself from the future, and it's like her versus her future self or something. There's something there, right? Like having like a past and a future version of the same character like fighting over their husband. Yeah. They also very quickly essentially move past any plot with like the looming divorce and like the rocky relationship stuff that they introduced, the very like tropey trite start to the film, by just like once the husband has died, Anne Hathaway essentially throws out her character throws out any of the reasons she's like not happy in her marriage and just decides she wants her husband back and is just happy with him after that when she gets him back. Like there's no real like resolution to that beyond, you know, the husband kind of, you know, there's some dialogue about like, oh, I just want to protect my family or something like that. Like there's a little bit of stuff there to like justify her getting over some things, but it feels like it needed more if they like reuniting those characters is done in a very rushed and kind of schmaltzy contrived way. Um yeah, just kind of a rushed and weird ending. I don't like hate it. I want to be clear with that. Like saying this is like weird isn't bad. Like the fact that it's like a time loop thing almost of like timey-wimey nonsense, that's not bad. That's fine. I like the dark implications of what she's done in the ending. And I even kind of like the juxtaposition of how happy the family is despite, you know, arguably the fact that Anne Hathaway's character committed an atrocity in a sense. It's interesting. Um, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. I also want to talk briefly that the ending has like the only like world building done in the film is like at the very end. We get some brief segments talking about the military like containing the area of the Mesozoic that time swapped into the modern neighborhood. And like Anne Hathaway's character interestingly pulls a Lord of the Rings. And what I mean by that is she writes a book that recounts the details of the movie while also having the same name as the movie, right? Frodo adds a segment to Bilbo's There and Back Again book called The Lord of the Rings, which recounts the events that Frodo experienced in the movie called Lord of the Rings, or the book called Lord of the Rings, if you're going with the original novel, right? This movie does the same thing where Anne Hathaway's character ends up writing a book called The End of Oak Street about the events they experience in the movie called The End of Oak Street. I thought that was pretty funny. I don't know how intentional that is, echoing Lord of the Rings, or if it's a coincidence, but I found it a pretty funny kind of pseudo callback to that. Um, Now, I want to talk about how I think this movie could have elevated itself out of this like okay 6, 7 out of 10 range and into like a fucking 9 out of 10 like banger classic of a film, right? I think the better version of this movie would be essentially a soft satire, kind of in the vein of 1987's Predator, which is a movie that I very strongly feel is a soft satire of action films, despite not too many people talking about that. So what I mean by this is we start The End of Oak Street basically the same way it starts, right? It's a schmaltzy saccharine stock 80s Amblin Entertainment ET vibe, right? You got the children going on the adventure type thing, right? And then what you do is when the father's brutally killed, which happens in the film, you stay with that tone. You do a hard switch to this dark, brutal survival tale. And the reason I bring up the Predator is this is exactly what 1987 Predator does. right? Predator starts as this like over the top, semi satirical military action film. It's got quips and one liners. The main characters have like infinite plot armor. They're just running into this encampment of guerrillas and slaughtering all the enemies. It's like over the top, standard 80s action stuff. Done very well, mind you, but still like very tropey standard 80s action stuff. Um, and then it pivots when the Predator is revealed to this like sci-fi survival horror angle, where you take these characters that belong, these characters in the situation that belongs in a lower brow, so to speak, a simpler stock action film, and you put them into this higher brow, like horrific survival sci-fi scenario. And that's genius. That is a genius concept to do. And I think if the end of Oak Street would have done that for Amblin, would have done for Amblin what Predator does for like 80s action films, it would have been incredible. It would have been so good. Um, like you would elevate the film by essentially critiquing like the sanitized vibe of like the 80s Amblin aesthetic and how these sort of like action adventure type films like E.T. and the Goonies and shit are the kind of scenarios that like the typical person would not make it through unscathed, right? Um, and that sort of like mid-film twist and like tone change would really resonate with me. I think that's something I would really like in the film like this. And it's already sort of doing that, right? It already does that with the father's death. It just doesn't commit to it. It kind of reverts back. And part of that's maybe how rushed it is to get to the end. It doesn't have time to like dwell anymore on like the darker aspects of the film. Um, and so yeah, I think if you just kept that tone for the rest of the film and maybe added another like 15 minutes to it to like pace out the ending better, you might have a proper masterpiece. So yeah, I think I would say this film was like a soft recommend. Like it's worth watching. It's worth going to the theater too, but it's not going to be like your new favorite movie, I don't think. It reminds me kind of in a way of like Alien Romulus, where I can't help but think about the movie in kind of a semi-negative light of like where if this movie committed more strongly to its stronger aspects, it could have been a fantastic film, and it just doesn't. And that's really unfortunate that it merely accepts being like okay. Um like Alien Romulus starts so strong and then just becomes like generic callbacks. And this film is like not structured in that same way, but it has like the same problem of being like very generic for a lot of it when it could have elevated itself to something like a modern classic. I will say that overall Oak Street is better than Alien Romulus. I say that as a big fan of the Alien franchise. Romulus had a lot of problems. Anyway, this is not a Alien Romulus review, so let's wrap this video up here. I think that's basically everything I have to say about Oak Street. Um, yeah, I do hope the movie does well or well enough. I wouldn't mind. You know, I'd go see an end of Oak Street too. The beginning of Second Oak Street. I don't know what you'd call it, but but yeah, you know, it'd be nice to see some dinosaur movies that aren't Jurassic make enough money to justify the occasional other dinosaur movie that isn't Jurassic. I would like that.